To get started with the substance of the event, my name is Alfredo Malaret Baldo, and I'm the Urban Violence Program Officer at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, University of San Diego, representing peace in our cities. I have the pleasure to serve as your moderator today, but I will try to keep my interventions to a minimum because we're here for the expert panel, not for me, and to learn from the violence reduction efforts in the cities that they represent. Just a bit of background on who we are and what we do. Peace in Our Cities is a network of 24 cities and over 40 community-based and international partners representing over 25 million people globally. Working together, Peace in Our Cities is committed to achieving a 50% reduction in urban violence by 2030, in line with the SDG agenda, the Sustainable Development Agenda. In just 3 years, the network has established itself as a nimble, unique, urban platform with a promise of outsized impact to build peaceful communities. As a network, we're dedicated to accelerating urban investment and facilitate the implementation of policies that aim to reduce and prevent violence through justice-centered, evidence-informed, and balanced approaches. The network, the Peace in Our City network, is co-facilitated by the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego, Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies at NYU's Center on International Cooperation, and the Stanley Center for Peace and Security. Today, more specifically, we will be speaking about the Peace Incentive Fund. Now, the Peace Incentive Fund is a micro-grant program for Peace in Our City members. It was launched in 2021 in a moment of compounding crisis, from public health to evolving public safety threats, to address a resource gap for cities to implement good practices. Through funding from the Kroc Institute, Peace in Our Cities members were invited to apply for small grants, aiming to advance city-based adaptations of evidence-based tools to combat violence. The evidence-based tools to combat violence were also a product of Peace in Our Cities' rigorous research, a fantastic paper called Peace in Our Cities in a Time of a Pandemic, and we'll put the links in the chat in a moment. Linking research to action in the middle of a COVID crisis not only reinforced city capacity, but also an ethos of grounding action with evidence. In total, under the Peace Incentive Fund, $135,000 were distributed, funding 9 awards in 8 different cities corresponding to 6 countries. And the funding was designed to address 5 violence priorities. These priorities are violence against women, violence in informal settings, violence associated with organized criminal groups, social media's influence on violence, and fostering relations between communities and law enforcement. The projects funded have now closed, and the outcomes have been presented through peer exchanges. Looking into the future, we're preparing to fundraise to finance a second edition of the Peace Incentive Fund, since demand signals are coming strongly. We're most impactful when we work together across borders and on shared goals. For this, we have the pleasure of having a panel composed of 4 recipients of the Peace Incentive Fund. Now you're in for a treat. Please allow me to introduce them. First, we have Daniela Reina, representing Palmira, Colombia. Daniela is a municipal government's First Lady and Cooperation Commissioner of Palmira in Colombia. Daniela led the development and positioning of the PASO strategy, an acronym for Peace and Opportunities in Palmira, which just received the United Cities and Local Governments Peace Prize in its 2022 version. Daniela is a professional in government and international relations and public management with extensive experience in Colombian peace building. Welcome, Daniela. After Daniela, we'll have Werner van Herlen from Mechelen, Belgium. Werner has been involved in the field of crime prevention and local security policies since 1998. From 2002 until now, he has served as a head of the local prevention and public safety department at the city of Mechelen. His department advises the city council about urban safety strategies where violence reduction is one of the main priorities. Participation, inclusion, and multi-stakeholder dialogue, collaboration are key elements in Mechelen's approach to tackling urban violence. Welcome, Werner. Third, we'll have Noemi Pisano. Noemi is in the executive leadership of the Council for the Promotion of Innovation and Design within the cluster of creative industries at the city of Guadalajara in Mexico. She has represented Mexico in the Latin American Network of Public Policy on Design, of which she's a founding member. She counts with more than 10 years of experience in international relations and cooperation. Welcome, Noemi. And fourth, but not least, we have Beatriz Kisi Nsubu. Beatriz is a team leader, Africa Country Programs at the Life and Peace Institute. Her work focuses on peace building in the Horn of Africa, with special emphasis on the nexus between peace building, governance, and development, and gender. Her research interests include violent extremism from an African feminist perspective, transitional justice and reconciliation, and the contextualization of international policies with an interest in youth, peace, and security. She is responsible for strategic leadership and oversight of 5 country programs, namely in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Sudan, and provisional support to the country managers. She's joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. With that introduction, now let's get started. We'll aim to finish on time, and just to let you know how this will work, we'll do 2 rounds of questions for each panelist, and we'll start with Daniela. Daniela, first, congratulations are in order. Palmira has won the ULC-LG 2022 Peace Prize. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to please share a little bit about the PASO strategy and the impact of the very well-deserved Peace Prize. Over to you.
Hi, hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this incredible audience so we can share our experience. And thank you for the Peace Prize announcement to the network. We want to share this with you also today.
Thank you, Daniela. What concrete results from the support of Peace in Our Cities network have you observed in Palmira, including the Peace Incentive Fund, and can you expand on what you did with the Peace Incentive Fund?
Well, for us, it was really important to be able to access to the Peace Fund of the Peace in Our Cities network, because we were able to strengthen all the results that we have having in Palmira by using the resources provided by the fund in something that we have shown as a lack of the strategy, and I'm going to explain more about the strategy also. The thing was that we lacked community leaders as well as an internal network of social organizations. So using these resources that the fund gave us, we could enhance these dialogues and communitarian dialogues that provide us more spaces and dialogue spaces with these actors, so we can show them the importance of having this kind of strategies and prevention strategies in our municipality. And this is a critical contribution because it allows us to sustain our strategy and its outcomes after we leave the government. So this is how we are trying to give them sustainability to our strategy. I don't know if you know about Palmira, but Palmira was ranked with first in the country and one of the most dangerous cities in the world in 2011, with a homicide rate of 98% per 100,000 inhabitants. And although the city's homicide rate is at its lowest point since we began tracking it, it remains significantly higher than the national homicide rate and the international average. So the 3 problems that the city present was to reduce its homicide rate, particularly the youth homicide rate between the ages of 14 and 28, were as follows. The first problem was disjointed and non-strategic public investment. The second one was the traditional care with little community interaction. And the third one was the lack of external investment and opportunities. So with the Peace Fund resources, we could have this community interaction and being able to involve the community in our strategy in order to achieve better resources, and also to have the feedback that we need to enhance our strategy. And this was really important in the process of building the strategy, but also in this process of the enhancement of the strategy, because we wanted to be recognized by the national government in this national process of peace building. And thank you to the platform, and thank you to the resources involved, and also to the Peace Prize of the UCLG Peace Prize. The municipality of Palmira was awarded in October, elevating the city and the region's international standing for our strategy Pasos that it is committed to a social innovation aimed at reducing homicide rates through the creation of opportunities. So we are really thankful for that, and we also hope that these resources can reach many other prevention strategies, and also the impact that we are having. The recent study of our national university and the Open Society Foundations have shown us some impact results about the existence of our strategy in our municipality and the reduction in the number of homicides in the municipality of Palmira. So we are really happy about that too. And we hope to could share this information also with you deeply.
Thank you, Daniela. I have one more question for you in this round. Palmira has a city motto, Pa'lante Palmira. For non-native Spanish speakers, and even native Spanish speakers, what does Pa'lante mean, and how does that inform the city's policymaking process?
Bueno, Pa'lante, looking forward, it's what it traduced. And we're trying to create in here the alternative to the traditional way to reduce homicide rates and juvenile homicide rates, because in Colombia and in many Latin American cities, the way as the state approaches to this problem is with more violence, with reinforcement of the force, the police force. So we want in here to show that it is possible to reduce that homicide, that we have been reducing these homicide rates with opportunities. And the opportunities is the only way we can achieve these results, but also that we only can look forward and be looking for a better future with opportunities only. And also we want to promote that other government agencies add value to the resources that they already have planned by involving this population, this young population, in its policies, and that we have achieved the double use of the public resources in this program, so we can share this experience also with other cities. And for us, that's really important, and we're trying to be in touch also with the government and the national government, the new national government, in order to enhance this strategy of being in other cities. We have this strategy in other cities, and not only Palmira going and looking forward, but also our region and Colombia.
Thank you, Daniela. and we will get back to talk in more detail about the strategy and the opportunities that you are creating for Palmira. Moving to Werner, and for participants who are joining, welcome. I see the numbers are growing, and those who have your hands raised, feel free to post your questions via the chat. I'm reading the chat, but your microphones are off by design. Werner, thank you for being here and welcome. My first question to you is, what did Mechelen do with the POC grant, Peace in Our Cities grant, and how did it impact the local violence prevention approach?
Yes, thank you, Alfredo, for that question. What Mechelen did with the PIOC Incentive Fund was it enabled us to have an experiment with the idea or the concept of safe spaces for young people. So it enabled us to create a small group of very different young people in Mechelen, and we asked them to be online as they do every day, as they are often very digital natives who are in this, who live in a world where a virtual and physical world are blurred and into one whole. And we asked them, what do they encounter of hate speech, of toxic polarization, of complot theories, and so on, how they felt about it and how they deal with it. That was basically the input there. It was very enriching for us because it gave us a clue on how to create a more structural online prevention policy. And we had a PhD student helping us on the more scientific side of it and to draw some lessons learned from this experiment. So because it's in Mechelen, of course, maybe just to be clear, Mechelen is a smaller city just in between Antwerp and Brussels, in Flanders, Belgium, the northern part. So it's there where we are situated. So we are not that big as a city, but we are part of one big urban agglomeration between Antwerp and Brussels. So we have since several years this same problems and challenges that the bigger cities face. Although we are much smaller as a local authority. And this online reality becomes more and more important because we see that there is a growing amount of hate speech and complot theories and polarization going on online. And social media serves as an amplifier in that. Just to give you an example, the Standaard, which is a very respected newspaper in Belgium, they saw that the number of sexist and racist message has tripled over the last 5 years. And also the European Observatory of Online Hate, they saw for the month of June alone, 750,000 very toxic messages on 4 topics, namely Ukraine, Judaism, Islam, and refugees. And 50,000 of them were extremely toxic. So it means that there is a lot of things going on, online threats, which affect local communities, members of local communities, of ethnic minorities in a city as Mechelen. And as local authority, we don't really have this this history or this experience on how to deal with this type of threats. So the PIOC fund really gives us some clues on how to proceed with a online prevention policy, which we are going to develop from January 2023, I'm sorry. But maybe that's your next question, Alfredo. So
that is my next question.
Your next question. Okay.
So, but I do have one immediate follow-up to this: the importance of tackling online threats. But can you share on the importance of doing so within a trusted, legal, and democratic framework? And what lessons does Mechelen have for the world to take notice?
Yes. Yes, it's not our ambition to go and scrape every hateful message that is said in Mechelen about Mechelen or that can afflict our community. We do need some new, let's say, rule of law and processing of all the data that is going on. It's not something that we want to do. We don't want to take over what the law enforcement agencies are able to do. We don't want to find those groups, extremist groups that are planning terrorist attacks or whatsoever, but we want to I think we want to bridge the gap between this offline reality and this online reality. And we try to have this idea of safe spaces in a more structural, systematic way so that young people can raise their voice, say what's on their mind, what their frustrations are and what they encounter and what really matters to them. And that our youth prevention workers, that they learn on what is in their day-to-day lives going on online, so that the one can learn from the other on how to be more resilient and build some resilience against these threats. So in fact, it's translating or rethinking existing prevention tools that we had in the physical world into a more online setting, and to incorporate that in our analysis and in our awareness that it's really something that young people are facing with these days. Just to give you an example, cyberbullying is a reality in schools and so on. And when 20 years ago, when you changed school or when school ended, the bullying often also ended. Now it goes on 24/7 a day. And we see fights going on after school, which originated in social media platforms and by cyberbullying. So it's our responsibility to change our way on how we think on urban violence prevention and to incorporate this whole virtual ecosystem into our daily work. But again, not by scraping and following and profiling people, individuals, and following them secretly online. That's not what we want to do. We want to have a dialogue, a safe dialogue with young people, because that is one of the things that they learned us, that they need to be able to talk and speak about their frustrations, grievances, emotions that they encounter online. They want to speak about it. So that's for the moment a way of thinking about our next steps.
Thank you, Werner. And the next intervention, the next round, I will ask you about safe spaces and the project for 2023 and the importance of that. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Now, Noemi, first, can you hear me okay?
Sí, te escucho.
Great. Okay, Noemi, thank you for being with us. Pleasure to have you connect from Guadalajara, Mexico. My first question is, can you share with us the initiative financed by the Peace Incentive Fund? And please share some insights on the importance of neutral spaces for violence reduction.
Claro que sí. El proyecto que nosotros desarrollamos con base en el incentivo fue un proyecto que denominamos Barrios Creativos, Barrios de Paz. Desde el Consejo Promotor de Innovación y Diseño, lo que promovemos son los ejercicios de creatividad vinculados a la innovación social, y se eligieron de la mano del gobierno de Guadalajara 3 barrios de la ciudad, los cuales fueron seleccionados con base en su índice de seguridad ciudadana. Es decir, los 3 barrios que tenían una mayor incidencia en temas delictivos, en temas de vulnerabilidad y de drogadicción, fueron aquellos que se seleccionaron para trabajar en ellos, y con base en metodologías creativas y de innovación que estamos muy acostumbrados en lo general a utilizar en los contextos empresariales, las adaptamos para llevarlos a un ejercicio de tipo social y se implementaron en estos barrios de los cuales les hablo, donde trabajamos sobre 3 ejes fundamentales. Uno de ellos fue crear grupos motores de paz en cada uno de estos barrios que estuvieran integrados por niños, adolescentes, jóvenes y adultos que se dedicaran a promover la paz al interior de esos barrios. Dentro de estos grupos también se hicieron vinculaciones con los cuerpos policíacos, específicamente con la policía de proximidad, que son esos cuerpos policíacos de la ciudad que están directamente atendiendo las necesidades de los barrios, con el objetivo de crear una mejor relación entre los ciudadanos de los barrios y los cuerpos policiales, pensando en vincular y generar una relación sana, una relación pues que como su nombre lo dice fuera muy próxima, de manera que no se identificara a estos dos grupos, por llamarlo de alguna forma, es decir, a los ciudadanos y a los policías, como grupos antagonistas, sino realmente como grupos que trabajan juntos para buscar la paz del barrio que cohabitan. A partir de estas acciones fue que estuvimos diseñando y trabajando con los ciudadanos de cada uno de los barrios diferentes planes, diferentes iniciativas y programas que ellos mismos diseñaban con base en las metodologías de innovación social de las que les hablo. Lo que se buscó fue que estos grupos motores desarrollaran planes de trabajo a un año, planes internos que ellos mismos identificaran como necesarios para mejorar la paz dentro de sus barrios, que definieran cuáles iban a ser las acciones y las actividades que iban a poner en marcha para poder implementar estas iniciativas y acciones de paz, y que desarrollaran también una planeación para poderlos llevar a cabo a lo largo de un año, de manera que estos pudieran estar constantemente desarrollándose, ¿no? Cada uno de los grupos motores en los diferentes barrios, pues identificó diferentes necesidades, identificó también diferentes propuestas de iniciativas a desarrollar y las fueron implementando, las han venido implementando porque realmente hace año contiguo a nuestra intervención está corriendo actualmente y nosotros estamos acompañándoles y dándoles seguimiento para que esto pueda suceder y que los grupos motores sigan trabajando en conjunto. El objetivo de nuestra intervención es llegar a los barrios, hacernos parte del ejercicio y activar estos grupos motores para que puedan seguir trabajando independientemente de que instituciones intermedias como nosotros o de que representantes de gobierno estén ahí trabajando constantemente, que sea una iniciativa de los ciudadanos la que se implemente de manera constante y que pueda ir avanzando y que de manera pues coordinada con algunas otras instancias públicas y privadas de tipo social o de tipo de organizaciones sociales, pues puedan seguir teniendo diferentes apoyos, coaching, acompañamiento, para que las cosas puedan ir sucediendo. Eso fue lo que hicimos con este incentivo de paz y establecimos estos espacios neutros más allá del espacio físico, en un espacio integrado por las personas. Es decir, estos grupos de trabajo de los ciudadanos, donde de manera inclusiva, donde de manera abierta y donde de manera segura, aquellos ciudadanos interesados en trabajar por mejorar la paz en sus barrios puedan tener incidencia, puedan tener cabida, puedan ser escuchados y puedan proponer soluciones, iniciativas, ideas que mejoren la paz dentro de sus propias comunidades en un espacio no mayor de unas cuantas manzanas, pensando en que se concentren precisamente en las necesidades de sus barrios.
Thank you, Noemi. And I have an immediate follow-up because I know you have seen some impact. Can you share a little about the impact you have noticed already in Guadalajara from your efforts? And what other lessons can the world take from the neutral spaces created by your project in Guadalajara?
Tenemos, como se los decía hace un momento, solamente este primer acercamiento o este primer piloto de proyecto con 3 barrios. Uno de los principales éxitos o logros alrededor del proyecto es el interés que ha surgido por otras ciudades que forman parte del área metropolitana de nuestro estado por tener este proyecto en sus ciudades y por la misma ciudad de Guadalajara de que este proyecto se lleve a otros barrios. Estamos hablando de que Guadalajara está aproximadamente integrada por alrededor de 150 barrios y solamente se intervinieron 3. Entonces, uno de estos aciertos o uno de estos logros es el interés no nada más de los gobiernos de la ciudad de Guadalajara y de las ciudades colindantes, sino incluso de los grupos de trabajo de la ciudadanía organizada en que este proyecto se lleve y se acerque a otros barrios. Esto ha sido principalmente porque los resultados son visibles en términos de ocupación de las calles y de ocupación de los espacios públicos, sobre todo con acciones y con actividades que tienen que ver con la convivencia entre aquellas personas que forman parte de los barrios, la convivencia pacífica entre aquellas personas que forman parte de los barrios. Hay que recordar que estamos hablando de barrios difíciles, de barrios catalogados, incluso estigmatizados socialmente como barrios corrompidos, como barrios con altos índices de delincuencia y de violencia interna y externa que llega a ellos también. Y sin embargo se ha logrado a partir de estas iniciativas ocupar las calles y ocupar los espacios públicos por aquellos que viven en los barrios de una manera pacífica a través de actividades culturales, deportivas y de diferentes tipos de acciones. Creo que eso ha sido lo que ha convertido a los espacios seguros, no en un entorno físico, insisto, sino en espacios en donde son las personas las que proveen esa seguridad a los demás miembros del barrio. Creo que eso ha sido uno de los principales aciertos o de los principales logros que son evidentes. También resulta muy interesante el cómo ha cambiado la dinámica de convivencia entre los cuerpos policiales y los, sobre todo jóvenes y adolescentes que habitan estos barrios. Ha habido mucho más entendimiento del qué hacer, del cómo el personaje del policía, más que ser punitivo o más allá de ser aquel externo que viene a detenerme, a corregirme, a generar este tipo de desencuentros, se están abriendo canales, no nada más de una mejor comunicación, sino de incluso una mejor convivencia que permite que, si bien siga, y es algo que tiene que trabajarse de manera más profunda, que incluso tal vez no esté ni siquiera en nuestras manos directamente, sino en un tema gubernamental, si bien se tienen que trabajar temas de delincuencia de manera más específica, sí empieza a generar una mayor vinculación con el cómo se pueden ir logrando y alcanzando estos bajas o estas subsanaciones de los índices de delincuencia en vinculación con el trabajo colectivo con los cuerpos policiales y cómo estos cuerpos policiales se vuelven parte de la comunidad del barrio de manera asesorada para poder cuidar el que esto no genere corrupción o el que esto no genere que ellos se vuelvan parte del problema, sino parte de la solución al ocupar estos espacios públicos.
Thank you, Noemi. And it's quite important to notice the impact of peer-to-peer exchanges and learning how other neighborhoods learn from the intervention in those 3 neighborhoods. We'll get back to you and have some follow-ups. But now, Beatriz, thank you for your patience. My first question is, please share a little about your project, and then how has the Peace Incentive Fund contributed to reducing some of the barriers that make it difficult for community-based organizations to access funding? And over to you.
Thank you very much. So the Peace Incentive Fund supported us to undertake a project in 3 informal settlements in Nairobi. And the project was dubbed Pamoja Mtaani, and it was fostering youth, women, and security actor engagements in Nairobi's informal settlements. And some of the things we undertook through this fund is peer-to-peer, youth-led and women-led dialogues towards reconciliation, as well as community reconciliation, but most importantly, also engagement with security actors. Just to give a little bit of background, there were strained relations between security actors and women and youth, particularly women that had either lost their sons through extrajudicial killings or their sons had been arrested or killed by the police, and they had grievances about this. And also young people who are complaining about arbitrary arrests, who are complaining about, really being taken into prison for no reason at all. So before you even commit a crime, because you come from that particular area, you're already considered a criminal. And so we brought them together to listen to each other, to understand each other better, because there were a lot of blame games on either side. And so this project enabled us to have meaningful conversations on exactly what the problems were. And these problems were not specifically in terms of only security actors wanting to be trigger happy, but also other systemic challenges that were being faced on both sides. And the project also gave us an opportunity to have peace action. So to bring them together to undertake activities that would foster lasting relationships. And some of these activities may sound simple, but in that particular context would never previously have happened. So for instance, we had young people buying pizza and going to eat pizza at the police station. And in these areas, young people stay very far away from police stations. And the whole idea was to really make police stations places of collaboration, and not only places where young people felt punished, but we also created spaces where security actors celebrated community members, particularly mothers who had lost their sons through extrajudicial killings, and acknowledging that some mistakes did happening and really showing good faith by sharing simple things like cake, but also engaging in community cleanups, in joint sports. And previously, one of the things you couldn't do was to bring security actors and young people together for a game of football, for example, because the young people would take it as a revenge opportunity. But then the project helped us to bring them together to sort of see, where do their strengths lie, that they can actually work together collectively for the good of the society. And we also had a lot of engagement, both with, not only with the youth, women, and the security actors, but we also brought in state actors, because this project was undertaken collaboratively by civil society and the Nairobi City County government, which is in charge of peace and security. And so we also engaged state actors. In addition to the police, we engaged the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. We also engaged the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. And one of the things that we discovered through this project was that there was a lot of misunderstanding. And so most of the time, community members would report, but they would report to the wrong offices. And so they would report something to the chief or to the county commissioner's office that was the role of a national government office. And nobody ever acted upon it. And they would get very frustrated and say, oh, government is not working towards peace and security, but only to discover that they were actually addressing their problems to the wrong offices. And so one of the things that the project did bring in was this increased awareness on, yes, there's a problem, but who is actually the right person to resolve it? And finally, just on the project, it's also helped us to localize the global agenda, particularly on two specific aspects: UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace and security, and UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. And the whole idea was to help them to see the broader picture, to acknowledge the fact that they were undertaking these small actions within these informal settlements, but these small actions were having an impact in contributing to the global peace and security agenda. And so helping them to feel that they are part of a much broader conversation and much broader and much needed action to sort of spur their interest. And just to summarize, what then has the Peace Incentive Fund done? For me, two things. One, it has fostered trust. The Peace Incentive Fund fostered trust because they provided flexible, demand-driven funding. And so really there was no specific instructions on this is exactly how your proposal should look like, as we often see. And of course, there was also an inclusive design process where, you know, there was discussion on ideas, giving input. There was flexible, very flexible reporting. And having been in the civil society space for a very long time, it was quite interesting that rather than being bogged down by various reports, a video call was sufficient to actually do a briefing. And it enabled then these really community members at the informal settlement level to be able to share on their experiences, on their actions in a language and in a way that they were familiar with. Because of low levels of education, they may not necessarily have been able to write a very good report in good English as expected. And so they actually, this Peace Incentive Fund is one of the flexible funds that allowed for this. It was also very accessible funding because the forms were, application forms are very simple and short. The disbursement was timely. And there was also a feedback loop. So regular sharing of progress and lessons learned, sharing of photos. And so in that way, it fostered trust. And in the second way, the Peace Incentive Fund provided a space for agency and voice. So it allowed community-based actors and state actors to jointly own the process. And so really to increase the accountability. And this was right from the design to the implementation. And it also allowed then for actors that wouldn't necessarily speak to each other to speak to each other about issues that affected their own community. So for me, in this way, the Peace Incentive Fund is a very good example of how to finance differently, how to finance from a place that is helpful to the communities and the cities that it intends to influence. Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you, Beatrice, and well noted all those positives from the Peace Incentive Fund. We are happy to hear them. But I do have another question for you, and it's less on the Peace Incentive Fund, but more on your observations from this project. And can you share a little about the root causes of violence that you have noted in your work across informal settlements?
Thank you. So of course, as you know, informal settlements are densely populated spaces. In the city of Nairobi, usually you'll find small mud huts or iron sheet houses that are really tiny. So just to give you a perspective, in one room, the small space, there could be a family of 11 staying together. And everything they do can be heard by the next door neighbor. And so within this particular space, you then have other challenges which contribute to the violence. And of course, informal settlements in Nairobi are considered both places where the violence happens, but also places where the actors of violence come from. And so it would be that even if crime is committed in another area, the first suspects would be those that come from informal settlements, because of course, when it is that densely populated, it is much easier to disappear. But this is much more complicated in terms of the root causes. One of the challenges is, of course, the issue of poverty. So you have people living less than $1 a day. They definitely must find ways to survive. And if they cannot find employment, because we have very high levels of unemployment, it means that they will look for other ways to survive. And of course, logically so, during the COVID period, we saw an increase in crime. And so, you know, reason being that people were unable to, some people lost their jobs, were unable to even meet their daily needs because they couldn't leave their houses. And so crime became the default. The other one is marginalization. And so even when city policies are being made, informal settlements tend to be ignored. And so developments that you see in other areas, whether it is even access to basic services like health, education, food, water, shelter, they do not have that kind of access. And of course, you have very low levels of education. Most do not go beyond maybe level grade 3 or grade 4. So they're not only, it's not only about lack of employment, it's that they are unemployable because they do not have the necessary or required qualifications. The other, root cause of violence is also a permissiveness of a culture of violence. And this comes about because if violence is all you've known for most of your life, it is very difficult to imagine that it is a strange thing. It is considered the norm. It is seen more as a means of survival. And so this culture of violence makes it really difficult to break the cycle. People will tell you, oh, my grandfather used to be a very well-known criminal. Did you ever hear of him? And then it was my father, and then it was me. And also, just to give you a picture, of this culture of violence, when somebody who was involved in crime is gunned down by the police, for instance, people during the burial, the person is celebrated as a hero, that they died doing something very brave and very manly, so to speak. And what this does then, it also increases the cycles of violence because people normalize it. And finally, it is also a question of poor governance. We suffer from corruption, which means that anybody that gets arrested with a little bit of money can get out of prison. And so that if you engage in crime and you pay something small, or you share some of the proceeds with the security actors, you will be out, which means why wouldn't you do it? And most importantly, it pays, because in a system that is suffering from corruption, when you see top level politicians getting away with it, when you see others getting away with it, there's a sense of, why should I not try it and make easy money? Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you for sharing that with us. We have one more round of questions, and I'm going to Daniela. But before asking that question, I want to recognize a great question that was posed by Irving Waller, an author, in the chat. And the question is, how do cities shift to evidence-based policies and investment in reducing violence? And I do want to take that question very quickly right now because it's timely. And because Peace in Our Cities is designed in many ways to cover that gap, to create the knowledge of what policies work and what is evidence-informed policies, and also to find the financing to support cities implementing these policies that are supported by evidence. So we are part of the solution in terms of filling that gap, in terms of finding what works, what the process works and the substance that works, and then working with our city partners to make it happen. So we're designed to cover that gap, and thank you for asking that question. Now, Daniela, talking about what works, can you share more about the methodology that you have implemented based on the resiliency dialogues that was financed under the Peace Incentive Fund?
Yes, as I was saying, the Peace Incentive Fund has been essential in allowing our strategy to emerge and grow. We are working with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, GTOC, which have worked in innovative violence prevention programs worldwide, working with coordination with the most vulnerable communities and people facing the negative impacts of organized crime and the homicide rates that we were facing. The main objective of the resilience dialogues is to appropriate or interiorize concepts, create networks of resilient actors, and increase their response capacity to counter the dominance and power of crime organized. And that is a hard job. These resilience actors can be community-based organizations, grassroots organizations, local journalists who investigate, representative of groups of women and youth, among others. And this process also implies identifying community initiatives, facilitating a collective analysis of the challenges that their areas of work have and provide tools and resources to strengthen their actions. At the end, with these resilient dialogues, that is, with the resources of the Peace Incentive Fund, we are recognizing existing violence prevention strategies. We are trying to focus on what it is working and what to enhance. So this is the main highlights of this methodology that we're using, and that are created for better engagement of the community to our peace, like the huge peace strategy of the municipal that we have.
Thank you, Daniela. And what you say is also key to another question I got in the chat about the sustainability and working with civil society partners, because governments transition, and what you have designed, in a way, it's sustainable for Palmira, because even after you leave the mayor's office, there'll be a civil society partner that carries your work. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you to Foro Regional Rosario, who posed a question about sustainability in the chat. Now, my final question, Daniela. We just talked about sustainability and long-term, and we talk about short-term. What are the Paso's near-term prospects? And please, can you share more on that?
Yes, well, first of all, we still have the money from the Peace Prize, the UCLG Peace Prize. So we're gonna use it for get more people involved in this initiative, more beneficiaries. And we try also to reinforce some of the components of the strategy. So that's what it's coming, and particularly these resilient dialogues that we started with the Peace Incentive Fund. We are trying to get bigger and with more spaces of dialogue. So that's our main focus right now at the short term.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you for being here, and congratulations again for the well-deserved Peace Prize. Werner, it should come as no surprise to you that my next question is, can you share more about the new projects? I think it is scheduled to launch in January of 2023, in which traditional youth prevention workers will learn from young people. And it's about also resilient about virtual extremism. Over to you, Werner.
Yes, thank you, Alfredo, for the question. Just as I mentioned with the Peace in Our Cities fund, we were able to do an experiment, and we were able to have a PhD student guiding that experiment. And one of his main conclusions was that young people told us, you don't know us when it comes to online realities. And the basic idea is that we don't give enough place or space for youth voices into our prevention policy. It's what we want to do with our project in January 23. We call it DOPREV, which means nothing in English. It means sustainable online prevention. So in English it would be SOPREV, but in Dutch it's DOPREV. To give these voices of young people a place into regular policy making, prevention policy making. And how we want to do it is by creating the safe spaces, which are trusted places for young people where they can talk about controversial issues, where they can discuss them, where they can out their frustrations, and so on. And once they've done that, the idea is to go into a more systematic approach and provide nuances, provide correct information, provide more evidence-based information, more facts that are checked into the discussion. And therefore, we want to train our facilitators, our youth prevention workers, who we want to be facilitators of those safe spaces, and that they feel at ease and that they feel comfortable in discussing these controversial issues and these issues that are often coming from online discussions. And after giving good information, nuances, and so on, the idea is also that this facilitator, this youth prevention worker, will support young people to translate their frustrations into concrete ideas and also into concrete democratic action, to become active citizens, to become an actor and not a subject, because and that will be, I think, our biggest challenge. As professionals, we have this tendency to take over and to translate information into goals, into a project plan, and so on and so on. So the challenge will be not to take over and to leave it to an open ending. And that will be a challenge for us as Mechelen, as city administration, to leave this open end and to see what comes from it. But we want to introduce this idea of, you could call it politicization of youth work into these topics, so that we are really trying to let go and to give room and space to young people to develop their own prevention strategies, if you could say so, in the end. So that's what we want to do from 2023. We also had, just to answer to one of the questions that was posed on how are we going to work on what works and know what works, there was also an evaluation framework that was introduced into the process, because that's often something that's lacking. We do things and we have an innovative new idea, and we can speak about it in platforms like these, but we don't really evaluate the impact. So we had this framework introduced, which was based on an existing framework developed by the European Crime Prevention Network, Qualiprev, so that our youth prevention workers also become at ease to use this type of to gather data, to use this data to do something with the impact evaluation, because we often say we can't really measure the impact of more social crime prevention initiatives. We tend to believe that we can evaluate the impact, but there is some reluctance to gather data on this matter. So also there we want to try our prevention workers on how to put this data, how to gather this data, how to monitor their work, and how to put it in an evaluation framework that has some value, that has been validated also elsewhere. Okay, so that's a bit the ambition that was started, or that had an impulse with the Peace in Our City funds last year. Last year.
Thank you, Werner, and thank you for bringing or highlighting the importance of impact evaluations to determine what works and what doesn't. To conclude very briefly, the world is struggling with us versus them narratives, toxic polarization that you have been working on. Any final nugget of wisdom that you can leave us with on doing that online? Over to you.
I think we should stay very positive on what we can do as local authority and a city, and that we don't have to be fatalistic about it, that we can't do anything about the Twitters and the Facebooks and the Twitches and the Discords of this world. I think we should look and try to rethink our existing strategies, our existing tools, and re-educate our prevention workers so that they are that we have this yes we can idea to tackle also this type of challenges.
Thank you, much appreciated. Thank you for your time and thank you for your efforts. Now, Noemí, can you hear me?
Te escucho, claro.
Okay, thank you. Now my question is looking forward. If you could design a second version of the Peace Incentive Fund, how will you design it? In an ideal world.
Bueno, claro, coincido con Beatriz. Me parece que el Fondo de Incentivos para la Paz es uno de los fondos más nobles que nos ha tocado recibir y operar. Resultó verdaderamente eficiente. Probablemente creo que, y lo estamos haciendo ahora mismo, pero tal vez pudiera ser un poco más fuerte durante el proceso, este tipo de vinculaciones. Hoy estoy aprendiendo muchísimo de los colegas que, al igual que nosotros, recibieron este fondo de apoyo, y tal vez hubiera sido súper interesante haber tenido la oportunidad de estos intercambios antes y durante el proceso de la aplicación y el desarrollo del fondo. También me parece que el poder considerar dentro de las partidas presupuestales del fondo elementos o acciones que tengan que ver con la continuidad de la que precisamente hablabas hace un rato con Daniela, me parece que son muy importantes. En nuestro caso, nosotros somos una organización de la iniciativa privada, no somos gobierno. Por lo tanto, estamos muy comprometidos en esto que platicaban hace un momento, de dar continuidad a las acciones sin importar los cambios gubernamentales e incluso sin importar pues, los colores o las tendencias políticas que toque tener en los diferentes gobiernos. Creo que si pudiéramos trabajar en el marco del fondo como equipo, todos aquellos que tenemos el privilegio de poderlo recibir, en compartir saberes, experiencias y acciones que nos permitan fortalecer programas de continuidad, y que estos programas de pronto pudieran también estar apoyados por partidas presupuestales dentro del fondo, me parece que sería un gran acierto, y pues también algo bien interesante que documentar y que mostrarle a las diferentes ciudades y a las diferentes iniciativas que como nosotros están promoviendo cuestiones de paz en nuestras ciudades.
Thank you, Noemi. Much appreciated. Thank you for your time. Appreciate the effort to connect and to speak with us today. Do we still have Beatrice on the line?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, hi, Beatrice.
Hi.
Okay, so this is a final question of the panel. And it's also looking ahead. What strategies can be utilized to reduce barriers to funding for community-level organizations? And this is not just a peace incentive fund, but also thinking beyond the peace incentive fund.
I think one of the strategies is to have a change in procedures or a change in processes. So one of the challenges that is faced by most, particularly in this space, is that there's very much a situation where you have language and jargon that nobody seems to understand at different levels. And so, I mean, it's very common to be in meetings, people will be talking about, oh, VEOs. Unless you're in this space, you will not understand that it means violent extremist organizations. And so one of the ways to look forward in terms of funding is to really reduce some of these barriers. The other one is to, for me, in many ways, the global decision making is disconnected from the local needs, particularly in conflict environments. And so sometimes some of the funding decisions that are taken are totally delinked from what is actually needed. And so spaces where honest conversations can happen, and that these conversations are actually taken into consideration, are critical if there's to be genuine progress in terms of financing differently. The other one is to really encourage collaboration and not competition. And of course, when we are in this, particularly the civil society space, it's always a competition to get funding of other organizations working within the same space, and less of a collaboration in terms of what can we do together. And of course, this is mainly from the funding partners side, who, just to give an example, previously in Kenya, different civil society organizations could access funding. Now, you must be in a consortia, or they say, oh, we'll put all our money into one basket and only one organization can access it. And that creates really unnecessary competition in entire sectors. And the other is that a lot of the time we do upward accountability. So we do reporting to our donors. we really do downward accountability to the communities that we work with, to the partners that we work with. And this is important if we are to actually address some of the challenges that the sector faces in terms of looking forward. And if these efforts are really to be sustainable, then there has to be some level of downward accountability as well. And finally, of course, coming from a place where we believe that the communities that we work with are really the experts in terms of knowing and doing what is best for their communities. And so really allowing them to set the agenda. And the final thing for me is to really also look at what are the priorities? What are some of the challenges that we are facing that are interlinked and that we definitely need to speak to each other about? And I'll just give an example. For instance, when we think about peace and security, we work in our siloed space, and then you will have people working on climate justice in another space. But at the end of the day, when we actually at the community level, these two are not separate, and these same communities are suffering from both, and they want solutions to all these challenges. Even if you think about the peace humanitarian development nexus that we, of course, talk often about, but rarely work on, we usually go back to the default. And so for me, for there to be sustainability in these spaces, particularly in terms of funding, these are some of the considerations that we must put in place.
Thank you, Beatriz. That was fantastic end to the panel. I want to rescue some of the nuggets of wisdom that you left us there with. Listening to communities, that's absolutely crucial. Peer-to-peer learning. The whole Peace Incentive Fund was designed on that purpose of peer-to-peer learning from before and after, as we're doing now, sharing results and outcomes. Sustainable approaches to funding, flexibility, and accountability. Impact monitoring, learning what works so we can replicate it and scale it. So with that, I will jump into that conclusion and note that we believe that through partnerships that combine political, people, and information power, city halls, local civil society organizations, and international partners, we can leverage good practices, what works, and that's our research arm, to achieve significant reductions in violence. And as Werner said, it is possible, it is doable, and you are examples that that is possible. Going forward, we stand committed to identifying opportunities for funding with potential to have a large impact and use it with the utmost efficiency, flexibility, so we can serve the communities. As Mayor Rees from Bristol, UK reminded us recently, goodwill and good intentions are not enough on their own. Our people need training, mental health services, good homes, recovery, and opportunities. And this requires spending, which is critical investment in resilience, productivity, and the wellness of societies. Our final message as Peace in Our Cities is that we pledge our unwavering support for cities committed to implementing justice-centered, evidence-informed, and balanced approaches to reducing urban violence. Thank you for attending today. My email is open. We will distribute a recording. It was a pleasure counting with you, and please rest assured that we will reach out to distribute a recording and keep in touch with our new projects. Thank you very much. We are on time, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.